Willow Creek was the kind of town where nothing truly bad ever seemed to happen. Nestled between fields of cotton and whispering pine trees, its residents lived quiet, ordinary lives. Everyone knew each other by name, doors were left unlocked, and Sunday service was the most important event of the week. At the center of it all stood St. Mary's Chapel, a modest white church with a wooden steeple and stained glass windows that caught the morning sun just right. It wasn't just a building, it was the heart of the town. And at the heart of that church was Pastor Elijah Moore. For over 20 years, Pastor Elijah had been a guiding light in Willow Creek. He baptized children, comforted grieving families, and delivered sermons that made people believe the world could still be good. He had a soft-spoken charm, always dressed neatly in a black coat and tie, with silver-framed glasses that sat perfectly on the bridge of his nose. He never raised. His voice never acted out of line. To the people of Willow Creek, he was more than a religious leader, he was family. When Elijah passed away suddenly at the age of 61, the entire town seemed to pause. It happened on a Tuesday morning. He had just returned from his morning walk, poured a cup of tea, and collapsed in his study from what doctors later called a massive heart attack. His funeral was the biggest the town had ever seen. People came from all over the county to pay their respects. Tears flowed freely. Stories of his kindness and wisdom were shared at the pulpit. No one questioned the manner of his death. It was just sad. A peaceful man gone too soon. After the service, church officials decided to clean out Elijah's personal office. The room had remained untouched for days, its curtains still drawn and his favorite chair facing the window. Dust floated in the sunbeams like little spirits, and the air felt heavier than usual. Volunteers carefully sorted through books, letters, and old sermon notes. Everything about the room seemed ordinary until they reached the large oak desk in the corner. The desk was locked. It took some time and effort, but eventually, one of the volunteers managed to pry it open with a screwdriver. Inside, they found paperwork, old Bibles, and one peculiar book that immediately stood out. It was a leather-bound Bible, much thicker than the others, with a faded cross on its cover and brittle, yellowed pages. When they picked it up, it felt too light for its size. That's when they noticed something strange. The middle section of the book had been carefully hollowed out, creating a secret compartment inside. In that hollowed space was a single cassette tape. There was no label, number writing on it, just a piece of masking tape with the date March 5, 2004, written in fading ink. No one understood what it was or why it had been hidden. The church secretary took the tape and handed it over to the local sheriff, unsure what else to do. It seemed out of place. Suspicious even. But it was likely nothing, maybe an old sermon. Or a forgotten recording, at least. That's what they believed. No one could have imagined that this single cassette, buried inside a Bible and sealed in a locked drawer, would unravel everything the town thought it knew about Pastor Elijah Moore. The man they buried with such honor had taken more than just secrets to his grave. He had left behind a confession, one that would tear open wounds no one knew existed, and expose a darkness hidden beneath decades of smiles, sermons, and Sunday peace. Asterisk, the sheriff's office wasn't equipped for mysteries. Willow Creek hadn't seen a major crime in years. Most calls involved lost pets, noise complaints, or the occasional trespassing incident. So when the cassette tape from Pastor Elijah's Bible landed on the sheriff's desk, it was treated more as a curiosity than a threat. Still, protocol demanded it be reviewed. An old tape deck was retrieved from the evidence room, and the sheriff, along with 2 deputies, gathered in a small soundproof office. One of them pressed play. What began as the calm, familiar voice of Pastor Elijah quickly turned into something none of them expected. His voice was measured, emotionless, not the warm tone people remembered from Sunday sermons. He identified himself clearly and stated the date, March 5, 2004. Then, without hesitation, he began to confess. He spoke about a girl named Rachel. Holloway. Rachel had vanished in 2004, the same year the tape was recorded. She was 17, quiet, bright, and deeply involved in the church youth group. Her disappearance had stunned the town. Posters were hung, search parties organized, and volunteers combed the woods and nearby highways for days. But no trace of her was ever found. Eventually, authorities assumed she had run away. Maybe she'd gotten tired of small-town life and escaped to Atlanta or beyond. The case went cold, and her name slowly faded from memory. But Elijah's tape said otherwise. He claimed Rachel never left Willow Creek. According to his words, she had died the night she went missing. Not in an accident, not by chance. He didn't explain everything in detail, but the implication was clear: he was responsible for her death. And what shocked investigators even more was where he said she was buried, beneath the church itself. Room fell silent as the tape continued to play. Elijah described the location calmly, like reciting a grocery list. Underneath the altar, he said, there was a false floor. Beneath that was a crawl space, originally built decades ago during a church renovation. Almost no one knew it existed. Elijah admitted he had used it to hide Rachel's body, sealing the area shut with stone tiles and covering the opening with a wooden panel. He said he had no choice. That's what he kept repeating. I had no choice. He never explained why. Confession continued with strange phrases that disturbed the listeners, references to cleansing the soul, being chosen, and silencing temptation. The language was cryptic, almost delusional, but the message was unmistakable. Elijah Moore had committed a crime so unthinkable, so hidden, that it had survived him. Until now, when the tape ended, no one moved for a while. The sheriff's hand hovered near the stop button, his knuckles pale. One of the deputies asked if it could be fake. But the voice, the mannerisms, even the pacing, it was undeniably Elijah. Authorities wasted no time. The church was locked down immediately. Investigators arrived with flashlights and equipment, and a forensic team was called in from a larger city nearby. Parishioners were told the building was undergoing maintenance, but the real reason was kept quiet. At night, under dim light and quiet prayers, workers carefully dismantled the altar. Beneath the layers of stone, just as Elijah had said, they found a hidden panel. It creaked open after decades of being undisturbed. The air inside was stale, untouched by time. There, in the narrow darkness, they found human remains. The body was curled tightly, the bones fragile, dressed in what remained of a school uniform. A bracelet still clung to one wrist, a charm bracelet with a small silver cross. Dental records confirmed it within days. It was Rachel Holloway. The truth was no longer just on tape. It was beneath their feet all along. Asterisk news of the discovery spread quickly, though authorities tried to contain it. In a town as small as Willow Creek, secrets rarely stayed buried for long. Within hours, whispers filled the streets, and by the next morning, the entire community knew that Rachel Holloway's body had been found beneath the church altar. Shock turned to disbelief, and disbelief to outrage. No one could understand how their trusted pastor had hidden such a terrible truth for so many years, right in the place where people came to seek peace and salvation. The medical examiner confirmed what the tape had suggested. Rachel had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The injury had been severe and immediate, ruling out any accident. It was no fall. There were no signs of restraint, but there was evidence that she had been moved post-mortem. Her body had been carefully positioned, her hands crossed over her chest as if laid to rest intentionally. The setting wasn't random, it was ceremonial. Investigators revisited the confession tape, listening closely for anything they might have missed. Toward the end, Elijah's tone had changed. He spoke of Rachel's death as a trial, and referred to her as the first. That single phrase sent chills down every spine in the room. If she was the first, who came next? Authorities began digging into Elijah's past, piecing together a timeline of his life before Willow Creek. He had served in several other towns throughout the South, each for a span of 2 to 5 years before being transferred. On the surface, it all looked normal: promotions, reassignment to growing congregations, and missionary work. But when investigators cross-referenced his timeline with missing persons reports, a disturbing pattern emerged. 5 teenage girls had vanished from towns where Elijah had previously served. Each girl had been active in church activities. Each disappearance had occurred within Elijah's final year at that location, and none of the cases had ever been solved. Their files had been collecting dust in police archives, closed or labeled as suspected runaways. With no bodies, no witnesses, and no signs of foul play at the time, the cases had simply faded away. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Authorities reopened the cases and notified the families, many of whom had long given up hope of closure. With this new information, suspicions turned into certainty. The church network that once praised Elijah for his dedication had, without knowing, moved him from town to town, possibly allowing him to escape scrutiny each time. Elijah's journals, found in his cabin near the forest's edge, added even more darkness to the story. Written in looping, erratic handwriting, they contained religious ramblings, delusions of divine purpose, and repeated references to cleansing the impure. Though he never named his victims, he described them in unsettling ways: vessels of temptation, souls caught in the storm, and broken lights needing to be extinguished. He wrote as if he believed he was saving them. Investigators realized that Elijah's actions weren't driven by panic or guilt. They were ritualistic, planned. He had hidden his crimes beneath a mask of piety and used religion as a shield. And for years, no one had looked behind it. The town of Willow Creek was paralyzed by grief and betrayal. Parents who had once trusted Elijah with their children now looked back on every moment, every conversation, with dread. The church doors were sealed. Flowers wilted on its steps. The place that had once offered hope was now a crime scene wrapped in yellow tape and silence. The tape had revealed one truth, but the rest of Elijah's secrets were still waiting to be uncovered. Asterisk. The deeper investigators looked into Pastor Elijah Moore's past, the more sinister the picture became. His life had always appeared honorable, full of service and faith, but now each detail was suspect. His carefully crafted image had served as the perfect disguise. The timeline of his movements, once considered routine transfers between churches, now raised suspicion. Every relocation corresponded with a disappearance. Every fresh start left behind a grieving family and unanswered questions. In 1989, a 16-year-old girl named Lily Freeman vanished from a town called Auburn Ridge, where Elijah had served for 3 years. Her case had gone cold within months. The following year, he was reassigned to a new church in Hollow Hill. In 1992, Ann Carter, a shy 15-year-old choir member, went missing after youth group practice. No leads, no evidence. Once again, Elijah left town quietly, his departure noted only in church newsletters. 3 more cases followed the same pattern: young girls, all involved in church activities, all disappearing without a trace during Elijah's final months in each parish. No one had connected the dots at the time. After all, who would suspect the pastor? With the tape as their starting point, law enforcement began re-interviewing families, former church staff, and anyone who had known Elijah during those years. What emerged was unsettling. Some recalled how he took special interest in certain girls, offering them mentorship, inviting them to help organize church events, sometimes requesting private counseling sessions. At the time, it was seen as kindness. Now it was evidence. Forensic experts were into Willow Creek to examine the area around the church more thoroughly. They explored the old storage sheds, crawl spaces, and even the land behind the cemetery. Using cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar, They searched for any signs of disturbed earth. That's when they found the second burial site. An old garden shed stood at the edge of the church property, half hidden by tall grass and time. It was weathered and forgotten, its door hanging crookedly on rusted hinges. Beneath the rotted floorboards, dogs picked up a scent. When the ground was excavated, 2 shallow graves were uncovered, side by side. Inside were the remains of 2 young girls, wrapped in faded tarps, partially preserved by the dry soil. Dental records confirmed what many feared. The remains belonged to Lily Freeman and Ann Carter, the town of Willow Creek, already reeling from Rachel Holloway's murder, now faced an even more horrifying truth. Elijah hadn't just killed once. He had carried out a series of killings over 2 decades, leaving a trail of silent victims hidden in the most sacred of spaces. And no one had ever questioned him. The journals found in Elijah's cabin were submitted to behavioral analysts. His writings revealed a disturbing belief system. He viewed himself as an agent of divine justice, convinced he was chosen to carry out holy corrections. He believed the girls were being saved from moral corruption, from a world he considered impure. His obsession with control, purity, and ritual hinted at deep psychological disturbance, masked by years of religious authority. The confession tape was no longer just evidence. It was a doorway into the mind of a man who had manipulated trust, exploited faith, and turned sanctuaries into graveyards. Law enforcement reviewed hours of Elijah's old sermons, looking for hidden messages or signs of guilt. In hindsight, certain phrases stood out, references to sacrifice, cleansing, and salvation. They had sounded poetic at the time. Now they sounded like warnings no one had understood. Each new discovery shattered what little comfort the town had left. The once beloved pastor had become something else entirely, a predator cloaked in righteousness. And yet, authorities believed there might be more victims, more secrets, more places where Elijah had buried the truth. Asterisk in the weeks following the discovery of the second burial site, investigators continued their search, driven by the fear that even more victims might remain hidden. Elijah Moore's crimes had exposed a chilling truth, not just about one man's evil, but about how easily trust could be used as a weapon. The church, once seen as a place of light and healing, had become a map of horrors. Each stone, each room was examined again. And then, one final clue emerged. Hidden behind the organ in the chapel, a thin metal panel was discovered, loosely nailed to the wall. It was oddly placed and didn't match the original construction. Behind it, authorities found a narrow space filled with more of Elijah's belongings, personal writings, audio cassettes, and photographs. Some of the images were innocent church events, group outings, but others were disturbing. Blurry, candid shots of girls from various towns. Always the same type, young, modestly dressed, often in church settings. These were not souvenirs. They were trophies. Among the tapes found in this space, one stood out. It was labeled only with a cross and a date, 1987. When investigators played it, they heard the same voice from the original confession. But this time, Elijah wasn't speaking about guilt or justification. He was practicing, repeating phrases, trying different tones, as if rehearsing how to sound honest, how to make a lie feel like truth. This tape wasn't a confession. It was a blueprint. The discoveries were overwhelming. Forensics teams confirmed that at least 2 more sets of remains were likely buried under the foundation of a now abandoned church Elijah had once led in Mississippi. Plans were made to excavate the site. Officials believed they had finally accounted for all the known disappearances tied to him. But with no final list of victims and no full confession, they could never be entirely sure. Elijah had taken most of his secrets to the grave. The town of Willow Creek was left broken. The community that once stood united in faith now struggled with disbelief and anger. St. Mary's Chapel was permanently closed and declared a crime scene. Some called for it to be torn down. Others wanted it preserved as a memorial to the victims. Arguments erupted at town meetings. Old friendships frayed. The betrayal had cut too deep. The families of the victims gathered privately to mourn again, this time with the truth laid bare. They held a joint service for the girls who had been silenced, lighting candles in their memory. Their names, Rachel Holloway, Lily Freeman, Ann Carter, and others, were finally spoken out loud without question or doubt. It was the only justice they would ever receive. The Bible that had once hidden the first cassette was placed into evidence storage, preserved not as a sacred object, but as the beginning of a nightmare. It sat beside Elijah's journals, the photographs, and the remaining tapes, a collection of the darkness he left behind. Elijah Moore was never arrested, never interrogated, never made to answer for what he had done. His death had protected him from consequence. But his voice, preserved on tape, had done what decades of suspicion could not. It had told the truth. Today, his original confession is used in police training across the state. Recruits listen to the calm, practiced words of a killer who lived among his victims, who wore trust like armor. They study the case as a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a collar and carries a Bible. The people of Willow Creek no longer speak of Elijah Moore with reverence. His name is not mentioned in Sunday prayers. His photograph no longer hangs in the town hall. What remains of his legacy is not his sermons, but his sins, and the chilling knowledge that the worst monsters are often the ones who convince you they could never exist. Asterisk.